This podcast is brought to you by Celicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Celicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter has sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Celicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-CELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@celicopter.com. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.
Hello and welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. This is episode number 11. We surpassed double digit last week with Mr. Daniel Duderman. And joining me today is Mr. Forrest Krupin. Forrest has a really unique story, and I'm so excited to have Forrest on the Helicopter Podcast. Forrest, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really good, man. So right now, Forrest, just to set the scene for our listeners there, your background does look riveting. It looks like you're in a really fancy upscale hotel in a really big city. Is that correct?
No, I am in my podunk little apartment in rural Beulah, North Dakota.
Okay, that's awesome. And why are you there, Forrest?
I didn't want to follow the traditional route through school with the typical sales pitch of a large school of your 5 ratings, being an instructor, 3,000 hours, move on to your turbine job. That's all great. It wasn't going to work for me, so I found a small school that kind of geared more towards ag, and I found a job with a small operator who I took my check ride actually December 13th of 2020, which was the day that, the world ended with COVID, right?
Sure.
And I took a job out here. He needed a truck driver, and I happened to have a commercial license, so I showed up here and ran the truck, and here we are.
Awesome. So right now you are in North Dakota because you are now flying, right? You're spraying.
Yes. Well, I'll be spraying this season. I've been doing a lot of pipeline patrols, different plan, building my time.
So you are flying, which is really exciting. Congratulations. And why this podcast is unique, well, obviously the whole podcast is unique because it's all about helicopters, but this one specifically with Forrest is unique because I've been fortunate to have some really high time pilots on the podcast so far. And Forrest actually joins us from a little bit of the different spectrum. He's on the slightly lower time, new to his career. Like he mentioned, he has kind of had a unique path to get where he's at. So I think that our listeners today, Forrest, are going to get a ton of great value from your current experience. And I think that your path is untraditional because I've kind of heard the story, but I can also say that there's a lot of untraditional paths out there. And there's a lot of people right now that are afraid to get into flying helicopters because they can't maybe afford the traditional path or whatever. So I think that today's episode is going to really inspire some of these listeners out there to get to it and do what they have. So what I know about it is essentially kind of truck driver to now helicopter pilot. So let's kind of start there. You started with, have you always wanted to fly helicopters?
No. So growing up, I was actually, my dad was a contractor, so I was around heavy equipment all the time. And then I went from heavy equipment into the ski industry. Back in 2015, 2016, I found out about something called a spider excavator. And I had to run these crazy contraption machines, and they went hand in hand. I found myself in 2016 on a job building a ski lift out in Wyoming, and I was running the spider. I was kind of the cool guy when you showed up at work, right? And then Timberline Helicopter shows up with a Blackhawk. Oh. And that was my first real exposure to working under helicopters. They show up. I happened to be there on fly day pouring concrete for the ski lift. And that was my first exposure to it. And I'm like, all right, I got to look into this and get more information on it. So when I went back to California, where I was living at the time, went to my local little airport, there happened to be a guy with an R-22 there doing some flight instruction. And I went up to him. I'm like, hey, man, I want to learn more. What does it even take to become a pilot? I had no idea. All I had done was work on this one job on concrete fly day. So
That's so funny. I mean, that's so cool though. I don't remember who I talked about it with the podcast, but being a longtime helicopter pilot, you get like a little salty sometimes. At least I do. Like I have definitely complained about having to fly, which is just silly. And something that you don't realize is like, when I was flying EMS, like I would land on a hospital pad in a metro area and people are all watching, looking, maybe that guy in the parking lot looking is just like you and like, oh my God, like how do I do that? Right. And so it's so cool to know that you were just literally coincidentally pouring concrete, building a ski lift, and here comes arguably the coolest helicopter right now for the civilian purpose. Of course, the Black Hawk with Timberline. And our good friend Yo-Yo was on recently, and I wonder if Yo-Yo was flying. That would be funny. We should connect with Yo-Yo on the back end and see if he was actually flying that helicopter that day. That'd be pretty.
Yeah. Ironically, at the time, I had no idea that was kind of one of the first ones doing that, and that was one of the first companies flying a Black Hawk. I was literally like, a helicopter, this is so cool. No idea at all that it was this, landmark in the industry.
Surplus to civilian. And one thing to also keep in mind, which is very untraditional from you, is most of my listeners, most of the guests that I've had so far are kind of similar to me. Like I've been wanting to fly stuff at least since I was like a little kid. Helicopters kind of came late. It wasn't like, I want to be a helicopter pilot. I just want to be a pilot. It was like this weird thing I was born with. So essentially you never really had that itch as a youngster. This just kind of happened that day when you were working that excavator.
Yeah, I wanted to run equipment. That's all I knew. I grew up, my dad was a landscape contractor. Like I said, he was always working in the dirt, and I wanted to be the guy sitting in the AC in a tractor. I had teachers tell me you couldn't get paid to look out a window, and here we are. Now I get paid to look out of a helicopter. So
that's amazing. All right, so you get super excited. You go to this flight school, you said in California, has an R-22. What kind of transpired next?
So I show up all gung-ho. I got a little bit of savings in my pocket. Never been in a helicopter at this point. I shouldn't say that. Back when I got life flighted as a little kid, but
doesn't count. You probably don't remember.
Doesn't count. Don't remember it. Sure, they took great care of me.
Let's just reverse real fast. Give me like 30 seconds of why you were life flighted.
I believe I was 12. I was riding dirt bikes, racing with some buddies, and I wrecked myself and busted up my arm, and they were concerned about if I had a back injury, so I got to take a ride in the helicopter.
Nice. You got to take a ride. Hopefully your parents didn't get too big of a bill at the end of that ride, because those can get costly.
Oh, we had that, whatever that insurance is, so I recommend
good.
that.
Yeah, no, seriously. I'm going to just tangent on that because that actually should be a known thing. I did air medical for a while. Obviously, there's a huge discussion within the industry of price gouging or charging, exorbitant amounts to transport a patient from A to B. An hour-long flight getting a $30,000 bill, $40,000 bill. And the big reason for it is a lot of the people that these air medical companies take are in rural areas. They can't actually ever get paid. So it's like 1 in 5 people actually fully pay. So then everyone else kind of has to eat it, which is unfortunate. But that being said, most companies, wherever you live, look up the providers, and they have like a $60 to $80, yearly membership in which, usually no strings attached can cover you. So super random tangent. Didn't think I would talk about that, but if anyone's listening and you don't have that insurance, I would definitely consider it. So you had that ride. That doesn't count. So no. R-22, your first flight. What is that experience like? Because you're going at it from like this. I'm not going. You never were going to be a pilot per se. Now you're just like saw this thing flying and you're like, I got to go do this. What was that experience like for you?
So I showed up at this local little airport in Auburn, California, town I'd grown up in. Found this guy on the ramp with a 22. Started talking to him. Didn't even know there was a flight school. I thought I was just paying some dude to go for a ride. I had no idea. He sits me down. We go through 30 minutes of ground. We go through the SFAR. All right, I had the paperwork. He's like, all right, we could go out and do this discovery flight. Briefed the flight a little bit. He's like, all right, we're going to go fly around over by the Forest Hill Bridge, over in the canyon. I'll show you when an auto rotation is.
You were like auto
Cool.
what-tation?
I'm like, exactly. I'm like, what? He's like, well, it's, he starts explaining that's how you can fly with your engine off. And okay, I just, knowing nothing about helicopters at the time, I'm like, whatever you say, bud, just don't kill me.
Yeah, yeah. Just I
Um,
don't want to die.
so we get back to the airport, typical Discovery flight. They let you try and hover for about 3 seconds. It doesn't work usually too well. We
Yeah.
land. I'm on cloud nine. I'm super stoked. I'm like, all right, I got a little bit of savings. What's it cost? I'm working nights at the ski resort as a groomer operator. I figure I could fly a couple, 2, 3 days a week, and by springtime, I'm going to be a pilot, right? And he then sits me down and tells me how expensive it is. I'm like, okay, well, I got to start sometime. I get all my books. I get enrolled in online ground school. He has a simulator. I do a couple hours in the simulator. I think I had 1.5 hours in the 22 with an instructor after that. Ran out of money completely. Savings
And
gone.
real fast too, so our listeners know of a timeline here. How long ago was this? Like, when did you start?
This was November, December 2016.
Okay, so not that long ago. You essentially buy some books, you do a demo flight, you have an hour and a half of total time, and you're like, oh crap,
Yep.
there's
I
no more
can't.
money.
No more money. Totally misjudged the idea that I was going to be able to work, live cheap, and pay as I go.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to happen.
No.
Young, didn't pay attention, didn't do my research. I was just stoked. Um, so I start looking at the bigger schools. I call, leave. I went and checked out Leading Edge, and then I actually went and checked out Hillsboro.
Okay.
Back in that time, start looking at the different ways to finance it through being attached to the college programs, like you've talked about with some of these other podcasts you've done.
Yep.
Those, to me, I sat down with a couple of those financial coordinators, and I had made some poor financial decisions earlier in my life that kept me from getting a loan at that point.
Sure.
So I started looking at, all right, how can I pay for school? Figured if I just got a decent job, I'd revisit it later. So I wound up getting a job in logging, hauling logs. My business brain kicks in. Somehow I correlated if I bought my own logging truck and started my business, I would make more money, and then I could fly in the off season in the winter.
That's cool.
I don't know how that correlated, but that's where my brain went.
That's awesome.
So I get a little sidetracked, start a business hauling logs, fast forward a couple years, wind up in Idaho, spring of 2019, and I wind up hauling logs off a helicopter job for R&R Connor, I believe it was. And that whole bug came back. All of a sudden, here I am hauling logs off this helicopter job. Thinking at the time, you're going to laugh, I was 27. I'm thinking, okay, I'm too old to get into this career change. I guess I'll just have fun hauling them. Yeah. I'm listening to someone else's podcast, and a gentleman, I believe he's an operator from Central Washington, is telling his story about he pivoted at, I think, early 30s. I'm like, all right, if that guy can do it, I can do it. So I start looking into schools in Idaho, look at a big school, and then I talked to a gentleman at a smaller school, realized I had enough equity in my business that if I sold my truck, my trailers, my equipment, I could now afford to go to flight school.
So
and
cool.
I wound up, I looked at the big school, and their timeline didn't match where I wanted to be. So I went and talked to the guy at the little school, and I'm still to this day not sure if he was interviewing me or if I was interviewing him.
Sure. Maybe
But
both.
They said exactly. And he is the one who introduced me to this alternate path, instead of the 5 ratings, being an instructor till 1,000 hours, because that really held me back in the beginning. I don't have the mindset to be an instructor. I didn't think. Looking back now, I think I could probably do it. It could be a lot of fun. At that time, I didn't know. So he introduces me to this other idea of ag, where, all right, now I've already got a CDL, I've got this trucking experience, this life experience, mechanical background. That's the unicorn for these other operators that have the ability to take low time pilots and still get them enough flight time to eventually get them spraying livestock he was tied in with a company in Texas. So that's the route I wound up going.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, just from the very beginning, it's very untraditional, but very, really cool. Between that time of, say, 2016, 2019, when you were operating your own business, I mean, did it kind of fizzle? Like, it was that going up and seeing that helicopter again on that other job in Idaho that kind of like reinvigorated the spark?
It it definitely fizzled. I got overwhelmed with running a business, and I didn't have time to think about helicopters anymore. I was working 5, 6 days a week. I was also the mechanic on my truck, fixing everything, running a business. I got to a point, I joined a flight club. I was going to go learn how to fly stuck wings
Oh,
because it was something fun to do. And I
yeah.
got to that point financially with my own business. I'm like, all right, maybe I'm never going to be a career pilot. I'll go learn to fly a little airplane. You could afford to own one of those. And then that was actually in Idaho right before I found that I showed up for this login job with a helicopter, and I'm okay. I need to
It was always
reevaluate what
supposed to
I'm
be
doing.
helicopters. It was never supposed to be
Exactly.
anything else. It sounds like, you know, and one thing I do want to point to is actually kind of 2 points. First point, if you are older out there and you're listening, you're like, oh man, I can't make the career change. There was an instructor that I knew when I was going through flight training. Now it's a little bit different because the guy was like an airline pilot for years, had like 15,000 hours, but no helicopter time, and he retired, was retired forever, and then at like age 70 decided to learn how to fly helicopters, and he was actually a flight instructor at Hillsboro for a couple of years, and he could have even been older than 70, I think. I'm not going to say his name because if he's younger than 70, I'm going to feel bad. But he was an old dude, and if you were in Hillsboro around the same time that I was, and you're listening, you probably remember who I'm talking about. But there's really no age limit, right? I mean, obviously, it is maybe a little bit harder for older guys and gals, but and then the second point I want to touch on is like what a blessing in disguise that you actually couldn't afford it, or that your past financial woes didn't allow you to just incur another $100,000 of debt. Because I know a lot of people, including myself, that were able to get the financing through flight schools, and 12 years later, it's still looming over my head. There's still this large flight school debt that I still owe myself and a lot of others. So the fact that like it didn't work out then, and then it just kind of transitioned into you being able to do your own thing and then afford out of pocket, I mean, that is incredible. It's worth the 3 years off essentially. I want to now ask a little bit about just the flight training portion itself. So being in equipment before, did that lend any type of help to you in kind of the dexterity of flying a helicopter? Did that make you kind of just a baller to begin with, or what?
I don't know if I would say baller, but I had a couple of my different instructors in the very beginning mention certain things. Hey, maybe running equipment helped your hand-eye coordination, or they had past experience with other equipment operators, and they're like, yeah, they tend to pick it up a little quicker. Um, I also fell into some other stereotypes with that. As far as ground goes, I struggled a lot. I hadn't been in school in a long time.
Sure.
Um, I don't. It did make me a baller, but I guess the feel helped. Looking outside and using your hands, feet, different ways. Maybe it
Yeah,
helped. Maybe
you
it didn't.
maybe a little bit of a leg up. I mean, I certainly have discovered that it seems like even those that are like big gamers, like some of my students that like gamed a lot, just were a little bit able to, fly the helicopter maybe a little bit better. And sometimes there's correlation, sometimes not. I honestly do believe with heavy equipment operation before, I've operated a Bobcat once, so I'm an expert in this, and so I can talk about it. Is that like that's hard. Like, your feet are doing this and it tilts the bucket and then this and that. I mean, it's just crazy. It's harder to me to drive a Bobcat than a helicopter. So I can only imagine that. I'm sure it does help. When you said that you struggled with some of the ground stuff, super common. Ground was never my thing. I hated ground actually. And if you're listening out there and you're struggling right now to get through the ground phase, you just got to put your head down and go through it. And not just get through it to get through it, but also try to, get better at really fully understanding it. What were some of the harder concepts for you, Forrest?
For me, all of it. I didn't even realize there was that much ground involved. I didn't do the research enough to know that there was this whole other portion. I thought I was going to show up, I was going to wiggle some sticks. They were going to teach me, how to not do the rodeo and a hover, and I was going to go take a check ride.
Sure.
I had I had realized at some point, all right, aerodynamics was going to you're going to have to know kind of how it worked. But I definitely struggled when it got to weather. Some of the aeromedical stuff was difficult. Now it's all more of it's clicked, but definitely in the beginning.
It's certainly interesting because as a helicopter pilot, as a pilot in general, it's like you're really an expert in nothing, but you're knowledgeable about a lot of other things, right? So like you're not an expert in weather, or at least I'm not, but like you have to learn about weather more than just the normal person, right? You're not again, I'm not a physicist. I did go to flight school with a physicist, and he explained aerodynamics to me one day, and like my eyes rolled back into my head, and I think I died for a second. I mean, he just like has this whole level of understanding above aerodynamics that, that I could understand just because of his knowledge and background. So it is tough because there's so many different little nuances, and then you get into regulations, right? Like just being able to read the FAR aim, like getting through the legal jargon of, except as provided in Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. It's like, what does that all mean, right? That was a big struggle for me, as like the FAR aim portion. But it sounds like obviously, you put your head down, you got your private and commercial, right?
Yep, I got my private and commercial, start to finish. I was about 5.5 months.
Oh, that was quick. So you dialed in quick.
I treated it like work. So that was part of the reason I went to a smaller school, is I wasn't fighting on the schedule with 35 other guys trying to get time in 4, 5, 6, 8 helicopters. It was the owner of the company, and he had one other instructor. There's one other part-time student, and I basically coordinate with the one instructor and the owner of the company. Hey, let's go fly. My private I did primarily with one of his instructors, and then when it came to my commercial, it was almost more of a job shadow than even school.
What do you mean by that?
I got to go with him on a lot of his commercial operations. He did a fair bit of predator control, some different survey work, and I get to tag along. Of course, he'd still bill me for it, but that's how I got my 44 time, paying 22 rates. I'd tag along to a job, and then I'd kind of be on the ground guy for him, depending on what he had going on, giving a spiel to the different guys getting in and out as far as predator control on a ranch, and then I'd fly back with him. So learning to deal with customers, learning, like you talked about on one of the podcasts, can't remember which one, but that 10% where someone's brain they slow down a little bit as soon as they get around to running aircraft and trying to deal with all that.
That's that was Eric Thresher from I think it was last week. It was his Thresher's 10%. So call out to Eric, Helicopter Safety Services. That was an interesting point to me, and it's funny that you bring that up because similar to you, he emailed me first on some talking points and whatnot. And he's like, I want to talk about the Thresher's 10% rule. And I just knew Eric as Eric. I didn't realize his last name was Thresher at the time. And so I'm like Googling Thresher 10% rule. Like, how come I've never heard of this 10% rule? I'm a horrible helicopter pilot. And then, of course, connect the dots, looked at the email. I'm like, oh, of course, it's his rule. And it is true, specifically when you're doing predation control or tours or any type of hot loading, unloading, the helicopter's still running. I mean, people just lose their mind. Like they literally can't figure it out. So I'm glad that you kind of got to experience that firsthand. So you were going on these jobs. Were you essentially kind of getting your stick time on the ferry to and from?
Yeah, that's how I got a lot of the stick time, or just being around it. Some of it, they trailered, a lot of Robbie guys, they like their trailers, right? So even in my commercial training, just learning how to put a 22 or a 44 on and off a trailer, that's something you don't do at a typical school.
It's not fun.
And then a lot of it was I was working for him on the side trying to get that extra little money towards school. I got sent down to the company he was tied in with in Texas a handful of times. Last January when they came out with that, you had to put the dash sevens on the 44s. I got ironically sent to Elbow Lake, Minnesota to pick up two sets of blades, which talk small industry moment. I'll tangent for a second on that one. How
Please do.
you never know when you walk in somewhere and you meet someone, you never know who they are and how it might affect you in your career later. So you always have to present yourself as a good person, have integrity, because now a little over a year later, we had a major annual down on one of our helicopters, and my boss is like, "Hey, you need to fly this bird over to Prairie Air in Elbow Lake, Minnesota." I'm like, "Wait, I know them. I've been there. Those guys are awesome." And anyway, small industry
I mean, it
moment
just kind of connected it. Yeah, I mean,
it just connected the dots. But
yeah, there's so many. You'll have many of those moments in life where you're like, either you've connected with someone in the past and then you're reconnecting with them randomly, you see them out in the field or whatnot, or it's just the name or whatnot. But yeah, I'm familiar with the Prairie up there as well. I've never been up to Minnesota though. I gotta say, the land of 10,000 lakes I've not been to. I gotta try it out sometime. Also, never been to North Dakota. So you're definitely one-upping me on both of those states. So you get kind of transition into the I guess this is kind of an unfortunate deal, but it obviously sounds like you made it through, but probably kind of scared at the time. You took your commercial check ride the day of kind of the world shutting down because of the COVID crisis.
Yeah, I got really lucky in that I had already secured my job in North Dakota a week or two prior to my commercial ride. No one really had foreseen COVID, obviously. I had this job opportunity. All of a sudden, the world's ending. I move to rural North Dakota. Had a fiance at the time. No idea what was going to happen. I show up here and basically swept the floor, mopped the hangar, cleaned helicopters, and we didn't turn a blade for almost 2 months because everything was just shut down. I showed up. I'm like, did I make the right decision?
You're like, oh my God.
We rebuilt the mixing system for the chemical on one of the mix trucks because we had nothing to do. That was my first 2 months in the helicopter industry as a pilot.
Yeah, of course. Right? That's crazy. I mean, that would be really scary. I mean, I know that there's a lot of I've got a lot of emails recently from other I guess younger pilots, but not even younger. I mean, I guess your lower time, but there's the COVID market really killed the tour industry. So those guys flying tours in Vegas, Grand Canyon and whatnot, they finally got their 1,000 hours. They show up and two weeks later they're furloughed and, they're not getting hired back. It's a really hard spot to be in for someone that took that traditional route. So it's probably really lucky actually that you're kind of gone down this ag path and utility path, because you're also doing pipeline and predation control and things like that. I consider that utility. Someone can tell me otherwise, I suppose, but I think that's hopefully something that's helped you maintain, a paycheck.
Yeah. The way my boss puts it is the weeds don't care. They're still going to grow and they're still going to need to be sprayed. They didn't care about COVID. And luckily, everyone, as a lot of people saw in the news, North South Dakota were kind of known for we didn't get as strict of lockdowns as a lot of other places. So we definitely got lucky.
Sure. So 2 months passes and you were able to start doing some flying. What is some of the first commercial experiences that you had as PIC, not just as a ride along?
So the first couple things we were doing was we were doing this pipeline patrol, which essentially you go through some classes so you can be a representative of the oil field, and you're flying around looking for leaks, equipment working on the right of way, people doing things they shouldn't be, following a line on flight, gathering areas. Some of them are transmission lines. And that was kind of the first real experience I had was in the commercial world. All of a sudden, I went from school, and then I had someone training me here, and I get to work one day, and they're like, "All right, here's an R44. The weather's not awesome. Have fun."
Don't die.
Exactly. Keep the spinny side up.
Yeah. So when you do the pipeline stuff, is it just you and the helicopter, or is there another representative with you?
For the most part, it's just me. Now, they're doing ride-alongs yearly. Back to that COVID, that was almost a blessing because with that low of time, I wasn't insurable to carry anyone.
Oh,
With COVID, they wouldn't let anyone come ride with me because of the
that's so
oil fields
funny.
all had their rules, right?
Yeah.
So I almost got lucky that I didn't have to carry anyone. So I just went out and did the surveys and we came back.
That is super lucky, actually. So essentially, because of COVID and the social distancing requirements, you actually were able to be on an insurable pilot, I guess, for an operation where otherwise you wouldn't have been.
That's the way it was explained to me is that I had to hit so many hours before I could go start carrying people. I don't understand the insurance side of it. I kind of just do what I'm told.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So the insurance companies only get stricter and stricter every year, it seems like, and a lot of it is for certain, more so for like oil companies, like their insurance, not even for the helicopters insurance, but like their insurance for their company wouldn't cover in a liability with a lower time pilot, or sometimes it's even a lot of power line contracts. Like they used to be able to do them in the R44, and then it got to the point where insurance was on the company side was like, hey, we're not going to insure an R44. We feel like the numbers tell us that the turbine is safer. Whether that's true or not, the insurance company can impose things like that. So you do see that a lot in the industry. In fact, we just helped we had a client buy a 44 for power line work, and then they had to transition into a 66, and then they realized that the 66 was good, but they wanted a 407. So all because of insurance, really. They had to kind of go from a $250,000 helicopter to a $1.3 million one, which is pretty wild. So pipeline patrol. Anything else?
yeah. So as the summer progressed, we got into our spray season. And I really wasn't flying a whole lot for the spray season. We brought on a couple other pilots to take care of the pipeline. I had my CDL. And when I was originally hired, I was hired knowing that I was going to run the truck for the summer. Um, I got lucky in that my boss has so many hours. He doesn't even care to ferry anymore. He doesn't want to
Of
fly straight
course.
and level. He'll go spray weeds. He also has a CDL. So a lot of places we were going in North and South Dakota, it was like, hey, you ferry the aircraft. I'm going to take the truck. And then we'd get there and we'd work. And I didn't believe until the first day of spraying how much I was going to learn and pick up on the ground.
Sure.
And that phrase that in school I couldn't stand, experience and exposure, all of a sudden it all clicked the first time we went out on that trip.
Yeah, so how does that work with the company that you're in? I mean, I know this is very common in the ag industry as a whole. So essentially, you get to ferry the aircraft to where you're spraying, but you're not actually going to be the pilot spraying for the first season, maybe even 2 seasons. I know that some companies are longer. What is your responsibilities then?
So my responsibilities were essentially make sure we had the chemical on the truck, the fuel, water. Um, I'd have to find somewhere where we were going to load. We're not going out to a field and we're not spraying crops. We don't spray any crop. It's all herbicide work, aquatics, um, dams, that sort of thing. So finding somewhere we can load and not piss off a landowner, or you got to kind of think about you don't want to be on the side of a highway either because you're going to cause an accident because everyone's driving along looking, oh, a helicopter.
Yeah.
So that was definitely part of it. And then the bird comes in on the truck every 5 to 7 minutes, and you're giving him his next load. And then a lot of times, what we were doing is we were working our way down a drainage system, so we weren't sitting in the same spot all day. A lot of times, you'd give him a load, and you'd have to go find another spot, hopefully before he had sprayed out his current load. So it's just a logistics nightmare, and you just kind of roll with it and have fun and do it safely.
Now, for our listeners out there and for the hosts of the Helicopter Podcast, when you're saying that you're not spraying crops and things, but you're spraying aquatics, dams, what does that all mean?
So a lot of the work we do is in like pasture lands. We're spraying like noxious weeds, non-native species, um, and then in the aquatics on the eastern portion of the state, you're near a lot of the farming. There's a lot of drainages that get filled up with cattails. So we go spray the cattails in the drains, and then
Okay.
we're really susceptible to any sort of weather because you're spraying essentially like a Roundup near crops. So you're always fighting weather, wind. It's the next level of
Yeah, what is the
taking
wind
care.
limitation for that chemical not to drift?
We try not to spray in more than 10 knots.
Wow. That's limiting.
Not much. Yeah, we spend a lot of time looking at each other in the summer when we're on those drainage. Um, and some guys will spray. It depends on the job we're doing. If we're out in a field, and I'll know a lot more by the end of the summer. After this will be my first summer spraying, so I haven't
That's exciting.
sprayed anything yet. It's mostly just listening to the salty old timers and trying to take in everything you can.
Yeah. So when you're, I guess so. You're obviously learning just the operation from the ground up, essentially. But is there anything from your perspective? And again, I'm gonna have to have you on after your season because I want to hear about your first season. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will want to know kind of your first ag season experience. But what are you kind of queuing in on? From the ground that you're like, oh wow, I would have never realized that, if I hadn't been on the ground first.
Gosh,
It's a tough question too, because it might be, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff, but if there's an example, I suppose.
It depends on what you're doing. It could just be the way the helicopter sounds coming off the truck. We were on a job and helicopters up there on the truck, and it just didn't sound right. My boss and I were looking at each other. Hey, maybe we shouldn't put a load in this. He landed, and it turned out the little spring that holds your mixture from going full rich had broke, and that it had to do with the idle screw, and it wasn't running right. So we had to fix that on the ground. Just little things you're picking up on that you never would have even thought to think about. Or
Sure.
coming in on a truck, all of a sudden you're paying attention to like your surroundings. Like, okay, am I loading on the side of the highway and going to cause an accident? Just stuff like that.
Just getting a sense of the whole kind of operation.
More than just the flying. Flying's important, but dealing with customers, all that.
Yeah, working with customers, right?
Working with people again.
It's hard. Yeah, I know. You're like, man, I just want to go back to driving a truck. Even though that could probably be frustrating because then you're driving, with people on the highway that are probably, annoying.
Much rather fly, yeah.
Yeah, flying. I have done it. I've never driven a semi truck. I would just assume that flying is probably a lot more fun. So that's pretty cool. So you've learned the operation from the ground up, and this season you are gonna get to cut your teeth spraying crop.
Yep.
Or not crop, but spraying what y'all spray.
Spraying weeds, yeah.
Yeah.
This will be my first season. I'm sure I'll still be in the truck a little bit, but the plan is to be spraying full time this summer. So
That's
put in
awesome.
that time in the beginning, and here we are.
Yeah, that's very typical ag route. So if you're listening and you're thinking like, man, I want to be an ag pilot, this is a traditional route. So how long is that season then for you guys? You will start spraying when, and kind of when does that wrap up?
Hopefully, we can start spraying mid-May.
Okay.
And then depending on the freeze, last year we were able to get to the third week of October.
It's a long season.
Down in South Dakota. That's if everything goes well. Last year we didn't spray until mid-June. It just depends on the weather.
And then is the plan to be a ski bum during the off season?
I wish. No, I was able to fly. We flew all winter on our pipeline contracts.
Oh yeah, you guys have the other contracts going.
We do. Yeah, we do a lot more than just the spraying. We fly pipeline in the winter. I'm getting ready here in a couple weeks to go out on some raptor surveys. That'll be interesting to learn. I've never
Very
done them
cool.
before, just heard about them. Maybe I'll take some time off and buzz over to Montana and go skiing. We'll see.
Yeah. What kind of skier? Like a backcountry guy?
No, I was never that cool. I raced in high school. I was kind of one of those nerdy kids who banged gates all winter in school.
This is my argument against that, Forrest, is that I wish my parents pushed me harder to race because I was like, those kids are dorks and I don't want to do it. Like, I just want to live in the park. I was like a little park rat, backcountry. But then come high school, my buddies that had been racing forever and were just super technically good skiers, they were better in the park. They were better in the backcountry. Like, I wish. I'm a good skier, but my technique is crap. Like my buddy Forrest, actually, Forrest Al, if you're listening to my podcast, because he's a airplane pilot, but also like a really good skier, he would be like, yeah, dude, Halsey's like can get down the hill just fine, but he's sloppy. So I wish I was a nerdy racer kid. Random tangent. Um, so I mean, the fact that you enjoy skiing and things like that, this just kind of brings me to this top of mind. My buddy Trent was just on the podcast a few weeks ago talking about heli skiing. Is that something that you would maybe like to do in the future?
Absolutely. I think everyone needs to have a base in something. If I could do a couple years in ag and have a good foundation, give back to the company a little bit that put some money into me, make that company some money, and then definitely look at it'd be cool to get into utility, something like that. Flying heli ski would be sweet. Even
Yeah.
just SIC for a season, just for the heck of it.
Yeah, it'd be awesome. I would, it'd be a crazy mission, very intense. In fact, as we speak today, sad news coming out of Alaska. I don't know if you heard about that, but there was an accident with an A-Star, AS350. And I think most of the people died. I think one person survived. And it was, I think it was a heli skiing deal. I'm not 100% sure. It's just looking through Facebook today. So sad news coming out of Alaska. That's helicopters, right? It's very dangerous. It's a dangerous operation on the perfect day. And then you throw going, flying around mountains, flying in weather, just makes it, even more dangerous. And in your experience doing pipeline, you're on your own. You're newer to flying helicopters. Have you had any experiences specifically with weather that you kind of felt like, oh man, I shouldn't be here, or I need to land, or have you had those experiences yet?
Yeah, I've had a couple. My boss he's got a great teaching style to where he knows the area. He's been doing it so long. He'll let me leave the airport when maybe the ceilings are a little lower than they should be, or he might have an idea that it hasn't quite lifted where I'm going yet. Yeah, I've had to turn around and come back to the airport a couple times in the very beginning. I made it about 7 minutes from the airport and went, maybe I shouldn't have done that. It had to just drop out of nowhere. It was a beautiful day, and it had it blow in on me, and I wound up in a farmer's field for a couple hours, landed. Luckily, that was summer and it was warm. Being up here in North Dakota, it's definitely another hazard to think about, especially flying in the winter. Yes, you can land your helicopter, but if it's minus 10 out and it's blowing 20 knots, how long are you really going to last if you have to shut down?
Sure. Do you
So,
guys carry at least some go gear, so if you are kind of stuck in the elements?
yeah, we carry, a little emergency bag and sleeping bag, some heat warmers, rations.
Yeah, just kind of having that preparedness. We have Dan Duderman, who was on last week. He talked a lot about that preparedness and being ready. He actually works a lot on yachts. He helps people get their yachts ready for helicopters and whatnot. And he's like, I'm the dork that shows up to the yacht with the flight suit, the life vest, and the helmet. And because he's like, man, if I'm going in the soup, I want to be prepared. Like, it doesn't matter, what I'm looking like or whatnot. So it sounds like even in your early career, you've made some weather decisions. And I think weather is one of those weird things. It's so hard because different people have different perspectives on what's comfortable, right? If you go, I had buddies that went up to Alaska for a couple of years and flew tours up in Alaska, and their idea of kind of flying weather is different than, say, a guy like myself who's kind of like a bluebird pilot. You know, I like good weather. I'm not used to flying in really poor visibility or low ceilings, and so they gain a level of comfortability that I just never had. So it is cool for you that you're exposed to different weather, because if you're not, then it's you don't really have a perception of, hey, what does 5 miles look like really, right, compared to 3. Like, because sometimes like I might see 5 to 6 miles and I'm like, oh, it's so bad, and then my buddies that flew in Alaska are like, dude, that's like 5-6 miles, and I'm like, really? I thought it was like 3, and they're like, oh no, 3 is way different, you know. So it's kind of cool that you can put that in your toolbox. And something else I want to touch on for us is in the email, you've had to learn kind of a lesson as a helicopter pilot of saying no. I'm going to tangent here because I guess I'm the host, so I can talk as much as I want, even though I'm blabbing a lot. But back in the day, kind of weird serendipitous, like you said, like you never know who you're going to talk to. I was learning how to fly helicopters, very, very new, very green. I sat next to this guy on an airplane going to San Diego. He was actually heading down to Hitch. He was from Portland, worked in San Diego for the fire department down there, the county, doing search and rescue, firefighting, all the cool stuff. I think he was flying a 212 at the time or something crazy. And his advice to me was like, learn how to say no. Like if a customer, an employer, someone tells you to go do something that you're not comfortable with, whether it's a mechanical issue, a weather issue, get comfortable in saying no. And that's super, super hard. It's like easy to talk about, like, oh, I'll just say no. But then when you actually present it with that scenario, it's extremely hard. So I know that you have recently actually kind of dealt with that first experience. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I've had to say no. For some reason, for me, saying no due to weather was never a big deal. You look outside and you're like, yeah, nope, that's maybe not the smartest thing to do. Wake up out of town. Yep, nope, stay in the hotel an extra night. Even customers, telling them no, hey, you can explain it to them a little bit. They want you to come in and do something. And you're like, yeah, no, maybe we shouldn't come in that way because 10 knot tailwind. You can kind of explain it and tell them why no, that's a bad idea. But we had an aircraft come out of maintenance that I was asked to fly, and there's just a discrepancy that I disagreed with, and having to say no to someone other than a customer, because your chances are your customer, maybe you don't know them that well, and it's probably easier to say no. And I had to say no to someone who I respect greatly and had been working for, and I had to be able to articulate, no, that's above my comfort level. I don't feel comfortable taking that aircraft with that. And something that I think benefited me, having come out of the working world prior, not being a 22-year-old instructor, is instead of getting all pissed off about it, when I said no, I took a step back. I came home, I got the maintenance manual out. I went through, I found the item, found the list of troubleshooting, called him up Saturday morning. Actually, I went in on the weekend. I was like, all right, this is what I found. This is what we could do to remedy it. Can I go to work on my weekend? I have the benefit of the owner of the company's an IA, so I'm mechanical. I could work under supervision, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. So then I came in and together remedied what I disagreed with. Monday morning, threw a new part on, went back to work. Everything was good to go. But the initial point of having to say no, being out of my comfort zone, was probably the most difficult decision I've made in aviation yet.
Well, it could be the best decision that you've made, right? No is easy to say, especially when it comes to mechanical, weather, sounds. You will end up flying helicopters a long time if you realize this concept of like, if the helicopter is telling you something there's wrong, whether there's a warning light or there's a noise or a weird vibration that you're not used to, then something is probably wrong. And I've always had this mindset of like, if something is wrong and something's different than all the other thousands of hours that I've flown, then it probably should be looked at. And so I think it's really admirable, and congratulations for you for having to take your first stand. And I agree with you. It sounds like you presented it in a really positive way of, hey, let's work on trying to figure out a solution together, instead of just being like, go pound sand, I'm not flying. So it seems like you were also very mature about it. And for our listeners that are new out there, you do bring up a good point. Here's a little free ground school, part 43, right, for maintenance and preventative maintenance, alterations and things like that. I think it's 43.5. I don't know. I think it's 43.5, where it's, those that are authorized to perform maintenance, preventative maintenance, blah, blah, blah. And Mr. Forrest is exactly right. You actually can work under the supervision of an IA, or I think even just an A&P, as long as it's not a required inspection, like an annual or something like that. So that's also really cool for us, that you're actually working for a company that's allowing you to do that. Do you have any aspirations of continuing to kind of log those maintenance hours to also get your A&P? Because that is one route to go.
Yeah, that's funny you bring that up. I've thought about it. I've definitely talked about it with the company where I am. I've also heard a handful of horror stories from guys that became pilots and then they became mechanics and they just kind of get stuck in the shop. I think I'm content being a mechanically able pilot. As a new pilot, I will say, if you have the opportunity to go work with your mechanic at your new job, if they'll let you in at school, if you can get in on the 100 hours to learn about your systems, just if you understand how that thing works beyond the basic level required to pass a check ride, it'll make you a better pilot. And you'll be able to be in the field with a problem, call up your mechanic and explain what's going on without sounding like an idiot. And your mechanic's really going to thank you for that.
I think what you meant to say is like sounding like Halsey, because that's always been. I'm better now. I'm much more. Excuse me. I'm much more solid on systems, kind of. If any of my old mechanics are listening, they're probably rolling their eyes, because I truly didn't have a great understanding. I'm not super mechanical as it is, and I would be like, this piece right here that goes into that section, I always would say, like, I should probably know what that is, but I don't. I think it's, so it's great advice for us that if you have the opportunity to go look at the helicopter, if you're at a flight school and they're overhauling a helicopter and you can go see it, torn apart and kind of get the insides of it. And always kind of have this curiosity. Like, that was something that I lacked. I was always kind of content just being like, hey, give me the information that I need to know to pass a check ride. And I've just been really lucky to, I was 18 at the time, when I was learning how to fly. And so I've just been lucky to mature as a human, through my also maturing as a helicopter pilot, to where, I've started to ask more questions and learn a lot more and really become what I feel to be a well-rounded pilot. But man, if you can start it young in your career, then go for it. So, flying ag, you had a very untraditional path. I hope that if there's those listening today, this is a prime example that don't think that you can't do something, right? I mean, whether it's flying helicopters or doing whatever, like if you want to go and do something, then figure out a way to make it work. And it doesn't have to always be this traditional route that everyone does. In fact, sometimes the path less traveled is really the more rewarding path. And it sounds like, Forrest, you've put yourself in positions of being prepared. And, one might say, hey, that was lucky that it happened this way, or lucky that it happened that way. But it seemed like you were prepared and ready to go. And, you couldn't fly in 2016, but you cut your teeth and did what you had to do to become a pilot. So congratulations. How many hours are you at now?
I just crept over 600, so I got a ways to go.
That's awesome, though. I mean, that's huge. That's a big freaking deal, for a guy that you didn't work as a flight instructor. You self-funded your training. You've been doing a lot of odd jobs, miscellaneous stuff, working on the ground. 600 hours is awesome. And how long has it taken you to get that 600 hours? What's the time frame? A year? Or so about... Obviously, I guess you have, 400 hours since you're... Or I guess less, right? You got 450 hours since you passed your commercial?
Yeah, so I took my commercial, I passed it, 151 or whatever it was, because I don't have an instrument. I don't have a CFI. So I was able to pretty easily do it in the FAA minimums. Um, so
That's awesome. So yeah, that's a lot of flight time, man. This past year you've flown over 400 hours. That's incredible. Flight instructors don't get that.
yeah,
EMS pilots don't get that. Utility guys get that for sure. So that makes sense. Well, hey man, that's super exciting. I'm trying to think, did we miss anything, man? This has been it's been a fun podcast. It's fun to hear about your path. It's fun to hear about what you're doing, and I feel like you definitely had some hurdles, but you've overcome them all.
I don't think we missed anything.
Yeah,
Unless
man.
you got any other questions?
It's been super fun. So how did you stumble across the helicopter podcast?
So I've always been a kind of a podcast guy, like I brought up earlier. That one I'd been listening to um, right before I decided to finally go to school. Um, I can't remember if I found it on social media. It may have been on one of those Facebook pages. Someone may have been ranting about it. I know I was trying to listen to a couple other aviation podcasts, and they were all geared towards corporate jobs, and
Sure.
they weren't really filling that need to actually hear about an industry I was interested in.
So
So
you
I think
just
somehow I found you.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'm really glad that you did. I really appreciate you reaching out. If you are listening to the Helicopter Podcast right now and you want to talk about your experience, Forrest reached out saying like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm like a new pilot, so I don't think it works." It's like, no, dude, this is the best. Like, this is the guys that I love talking to because this is really cool. And I know that we have a lot of listeners out there that are training, so it's great guests like Forrest that make this all work. So, Forrest, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to meet with me on the Helicopter Podcast today. If you are interested in being on the Helicopter Podcast, you can, Facebook message me either on the Helicopter Podcast Facebook page. You can go to Celicopter as well. That's my sales brokerage that I own. But yeah, I just love talking shop. I love hearing about all different experiences. Who do we have next week? I don't know yet, actually. I think we have a surprise guest because I don't know if I booked anyone for after your episode, so I need to get to it. But Forrest, thank you so much for being on. Anything else, my friend?
Thank you for having me. I will say for any new pilots that are training, find yourself a mentor, and don't go find the guy whose job you want next. You know, if you're an instructor, you don't necessarily want your mentor to be the guy who's at the Grand Canyon. You want to go find that guy who's been in the industry 10, 12, 15 years, and you don't want to be super obnoxious about bugging them all the time, but find a couple people that you can ask those industry questions to outside of your circle of networking. Go find someone that has been there, done that, and you could learn from.
Yeah, it's huge. I've talked about it before on the podcast. I mean, having a mentor, having someone that you can rely on is key. And I would also just say, bug them, annoy them because they probably annoyed other people to get to where they're at. And again, you want to be tactful. I guess you're right. You don't want to blow them up all the time.
Yeah.
But it's a great advice, and to have different people within different parts of the industry that can kind of guide you. Specifically someone like yourself, Forrest. I mean, you again, 2015. What's a helicopter, right? Like it's a thing that flies, but you probably never expected that you would be, flying helicopters as a professional pilot. So it's really cool, and using mentors is a great example. I'm a super white collar pilot, I call it. Like I don't do any of the fun stuff like you guys do in the ag world or the utility world. It's just I chose kind of a different path, and I'm actually not flying full time right now. Just kind of been focusing on building the business. However, if you ever want to talk shop, you can always add me to your mentor list as well. Been around different parts of the industry and whatnot, so I'm happy to stay in touch. And I want to hear about your first season. I think it's going to be really fun to hear some of the lessons, maybe. I think some lessons learned might happen in a first year ag.
I'm sure there'll be plenty.
Just assuming, be safe, man. Go at your own pace. I know that it's production work, I'm sure. So, time is money, and, the more you can spray, the more you all get paid. But it all don't mean nothing if you don't get home. So just keep that in mind. Mind your P's and Q's, go at your own pace. You seem like you got a super good head on your shoulder. So I have no no doubt that you'll do really good. And again, thank you so much for joining. Once again, this is episode number 11 with Forrest Krupin of the Helicopter Podcast. If you like it, then please subscribe, share, do whatever you all want to do. Other than that, we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, Forrest.
Thanks.
As always, a special thanks to Celicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Celicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Celicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Celicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-Celicopter. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Celicopter pilot agent will reach out. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.